Okay, so we're starting here. As you can see, you got the jack and tools and everything out and stand. I'm gonna break loose the lug nuts, jack it up, and put it on the stand. Now that it's on the jack stand, put a little bit of cardboard so it doesn't scuff up the floor. Took it off the jack, but it's still there. Now we're just gonna zip these out and figure to broke them. Okay, so now we have the tire off. You can clearly see this ball joint completely is blown out. I've just been topping it off every now and then with oil, but clearly it's just past its point. And we'll kind of, see the rest of this once we get in there. I'm gonna start by taking this cover off, and we're gonna remove the axle nut bolt. And you just kind of have to work your way around this with a screwdriver, and you'll eventually be able to just pop it off. And then what I'm doing with everything that we're removing is putting it into my little container so I know where it belongs. Here, and then once I take off this little nut that holds on the end of the axle, then at least we won't have to worry about that later. And then I'll begin by removing the caliper bolts back here, and pulling the whole caliper off, send it aside, and then we can pull off the rotor. That'll give us more access. You can typically do the ball joints and stuff without having to take all this off, but it's very hard because this is extremely heavy. So once you take this off, it's a lot easier. And since we're replacing pads and the rotor, it'll be much better that way. So you can see here, there's a little bit of an edge right there. And same thing with down here. And you can see it's just really glossy. I don't know, they're probably still okay, but there's a little bit of like a wobble in it. But anyways, I already got the new rotor, so those are going on. Okay, so what I have here is some zip ties. So before I remove the caliper, I want to make sure that zip ties are wire line ready. So I can kind of zip tie it up out of the way. Just make a plan before you take it off because it's really heavy and you don't want to hurt the lines. With that said, we can also remove these bolts beforehand to make sure that we don't pull the brake line out of the way. And since we're removing the hub and replacing it, we can also take the ABS speed sensor off here and then kind of follow it up. It clips in up here into the liner somewhere. I think it's actually this one. And then we can also spray some penetrating oil on the hub bolts and let that set while we're working on some other stuff. And then an update, so this pack out, what I did here is I added a little divider, because in that way I can see, I threw in all the tools I thought I would need, and this side is what I'm actually using. Same thing here, this is for the cap and the axle nut, and then here's just like the lug nuts I removed. Those aren't going back on, so they're on this side. Now as I remove things, I can kind of separate them and organize them on this side, so I know what bolts go to what section of the vehicle I'm working on. Okay, so now I have the caliper off, zip tied up there. One thing is make sure your zip ties are new and not broken because it dropped on one of these old ones. So now I have it going through the frame on a new one, and there's no tension on the hose, so we can continue with our work here. So I'm gonna pull the rotor off, and then I will kind of see from there if I'm gonna go remove the ball joint or I might start loosening up the coil. I'm not really sure yet. Okay, so here's where I'm at. I can't get the rotor off, it's frozen on there. So for right now, I'm going to just loosen up the top lower control arms. I'll have a crescent in on the inside one, and then on this outside, 21 millimeter wrench. I already removed the bolt on this side, doing the exact same thing. So once I'm done with loosening those, I can loosen the top of the coil and the bottom, and then I'll beat on this a little bit with a hammer and try to get the rotor off. Okay, finally got the rotor off. Used Thor's hammer, absolute beat the bejesus out of it. Finally got it off. So now we can start working on getting this hub off. Okay, so I'm out of breath, but use a breaker bar with an 18 millimeter and we need a self-ratcheting 18 to get the 4 bolts on the back of the hub off, and then that should be able just to knock right off. Okay, so I got the hub off. That was pretty easy. It's sitting right there, so you just have to unplug all the wires, then pull this out of the top. Make sure you don't pull it too hard, but you pull the red tab up, and then press the little button. And then it'll release. And then, yeah, so then now we're done with the hub. All right, so next steps are going to be, I'm going to disconnect the bottom of the sway bar, and I'm going to loosen up the top, the bottom bolt there for the coilover, and then the 3 bolts at the top for the coil. And then I can remove the coil, and that will also let loose of the lower control arm. I'm not going to even bother unbolting these. I guess I have to. So yeah, I'll have to disconnect those before I remove the control arms, but yeah. Okay, so to get the sway bar link off, usually you can use an impact or a driver that's super fast, and you can sneak up on it and pull the bolt off. It wasn't, it just started spinning, so then you just use some type of vice grips. I have these needle noses that were perfect, and you just grab the part that's spinning at the bottom, lock onto them, and then, you know, blast it out, or if you are using a ratchet, just, you know, ratchet it off. Okay, so I pulled the cotter pins out of the top and bottom ball joints. What I'm going to do now is actually remove the tie rod. I'm still trying to determine if I should replace these, so once it's off I can kind of wiggle it and see if there's any play, but it seems pretty solid. I do have the parts for it, but I don't have a new boot, and I want to put a new boot on, so I might do that some point later. So right now I'm going to remove the tie rod, and then I can remove the lower ball joint. Once the lower ball joint's off, then I can remove the upper ball joint and just pull the whole knuckle off. I'm going to clean it up, scrub it off and whatnot. It's pretty messy. Then from there, I can remove the coil. I'll make sure that I loosen that prior to taking off all of this. And then once the knuckle's off, then I can pull off the upper control arm, and then I can pull the coil out, and then I can loosen and take off the bottom. And then after that, it should be reverse order reassembly, depending on if I want to redo the tie rod or not. My only thing is I've seen it's extremely hard to salvage that boot, and I really don't want to mess with it if it's okay right now. Okay, so now I have the tie rod and loose. You can usually put the bolt here. A lot of people take it off. Sometimes you can get it on the opposite direction and tap on the bottom, but I think here there's an actual and without thread that you might be able to just tap this out. Otherwise you need to get like a spreader or a pickle fork that goes in here and pops it off. I just don't want to damage it, so I'm going to try tapping it down here and see if it just pops out. So here's the tie rod. So it doesn't really support its own weight. I don't necessarily think it's bad. There's no play. So like if you move this, there's not any clicking noises. There's not like a clunk. It doesn't get stuck in a certain spot. It's not super loose. So honestly, this seems fine. The inner honestly seems okay as well, but I'm gonna actually play with the new ones and just see if they're, you know, a good comparison. If they're very similar, then I'm just not gonna bother with doing that. Okay, so now I'm actually sitting down thinking about it. This still has the vacuum actuator connected to the back of the axle for a 4-wheel drive. And I don't want to take the whole arm off and let that dangle or have to hide it out of place. So I'm going to remove the coil first, and then I'm going to remove the upper ball joint and the control arm. And then from there, I can put in the new upper control arm and then put the coil back in, and I can connect the knuckle back up to the upper arm. Then that will hold the weight of the whole knuckle while I do the bottom end work. All right, so it's 3 15mm bolts at the top. Honestly, the easiest thing I've ever done is buy these auto ratcheting wrenches. It's way better than even using a socket up there, because it's hard to get a socket in here and you end up scraping your hand on this. This is much, much easier. Okay, so that's out. Right now, what I'm gonna do is take a picture so I know which way everything's oriented, because when I pull all the new stuff out of the boxes, I have them for both sides, so I just wanna make sure that I use the right stuff the first time and not have to undo something. And so I would like to mention that this is sort of a specialty socket, 27mm, that's used on the outer side of the coil perch here. Not really a coil perch, but this one. So that's sort of the only specialty tool, besides, basic hand tools. You can get all this apart. I did use an impact driver, but that's just to make it faster. You can do it without it. And then at the end of this video, I'll go and show you all the different sizes and everything. I'll try to put it down in the description if I have some time. Okay, so I've completely taken out the coil. I've unbolted the coil, but it's kind of stuck in there. There's not enough room. So I've loosened up the nut for the upper ball joint. I'm gonna do the lower and then just leave them on a little bit so you can tap this part of the knuckle right there and break it loose, and that way it doesn't completely fall off, and you can kind of at that point decide which one's easier, either undoing the bottom one first or upper. The reason why I keep wanting to do the upper first is so I can swap the coil in the upper control arm, and then once that's done, I can sort of start reassembly and then just do the lower, and hopefully that'll be the quicker way. Okay, so after I loosened them, hit them right here with the hammer, separated them. I couldn't get enough room to still remove the lower section here, so I just pulled them apart. With that said, once this folded out, you can see the vacuum line here just kind of popped off. I didn't pay attention to that, so that could have been a really bad thing had it just not, been normal to just pop that out. The next thing is the CV axle here. I just have to make sure that I re-grease it when I put it back in, make sure that that inner gear is also in the right position, because that's been moving around quite a lot. So that's another thing to pay attention to. But yeah, so let's see now if I can push this up. And pull this out. And this is honestly the main reason why I'm doing all this, so let's see how bad it really is. Okay, so wrestle that out. You can see here where this part of the eye comes up. It's not in the center anymore. So this internal piece broke a while ago, and you can see that we put a few shims in there to kind of hold it together. That didn't really work. Usually there's a rubber piece in here. I think that just completely got disintegrated. But this is what I was talking about. This is the Bilstein, but this is the original coil that came with the truck. So what you would do is you would compress this entire stack, unbolt this top bolt, pull it all apart, put this coil onto another strut, and then put it back in. But honestly, that took me way too long, and I think it's just honestly dangerous. But yeah, so here we are. That's honestly the main reason why I'm doing all this. But as you can see, the ball joint and all that sort of stuff are kind of gone too. So yeah, about halfway there. Hopefully now it'll go easy. Those are already unbolted, so I can pull out the upper control arm. And then from there, it'll just be reassembling. Okay, let's see here. This is the right side, and it is not. It's back in the box. And that looks like. Okay, so here's the new one, and I'm very questionable on their quality because it's already missing the zerks. Don't think I saw it in the bag. Oh yeah, there it is. Never mind. Okay, so I'm gonna install that, and then you can see the cup is, oh look, it's got actually a nice cup on it to protect it. So that's nice. But yeah, so make sure that this is oriented the right way here. And this is the correct one, put it on this side. And it has an L for left. Nice. So as I just put the new upper control arm in, I ran out of grease, so I'll have to borrow some. I'm on top of that, I put the bolts back in, but what is nice is I did actually organize for once in my life, and you can see here, so here's all the stuff for the coil. Here are the 4 for the hub. These 2 are the ones I need for the upper control arm. These 2 are for the caliper, and these are for the 2 little brackets that go into the knuckle, and that's the axle nut and the cover. So it's nice when you have something to organize it in. I mean, you can do little plastic tubs or Ziploc baggies. It always helps. But yeah, so now I'm gonna put these in. I'm not gonna tighten them quite yet. I'm gonna make sure I put the nuts on them so I don't lose them. And then I still just need to do the bottom. And yeah, I'll get there pretty soon. Okay, so now I got the whole knuckle out. I had to use an actual press to get that off for the bottom. I don't know what was holding it on, but oh yeah, that's bad, you can hear it. That one's shot. And so here's the knuckle. I might just put the hub on it while it's off. That might be a little bit easier, because then I can just one-shot it into this. But now I just have to remove the 2 bolts. There are cam bolts and other washers and stuff inside these lowers, so they can be adjusted, so be careful when you do that to remember the order. And yeah, so then once I pull that off, I'll put on the new one, and then it'll just be reassembly. Honestly, this looks ridiculous, but 16, 18-inch crescent is the only thing that gets these lower things off. It's a 26 millimeter, but I don't have a deep socket 26, so massive crescent and a lot of force is what takes out these lower control arm bolts. Okay, so I got the lowers off. I was wrong, there's not cam bolts, that's just a gaping hole that you tighten down to as tight as you can, I guess. Get the caster and angle right. I will say, I don't think that these bushings are all that bad. They look like they're in good shape. They're not rotted, they're not crinkled, there's no real, dry rot on them. They're not loose. I tried this in there with some leverage and they seemed okay, but this is the one that gets me. This is a Moog ball joint replaced at about 100,000 miles ago. In this, you can hear grinding. This one had a good seal, had plenty of grease, and was always upkept. The upper here from TTX blew the rubber, but if you hear, there's no grinding or anything. This one's still good. So and these were replaced at the same time. So I don't know that Moog is really doing that. I probably won't buy Moog anymore. But yeah, so now just gotta get the new TTX lower, bolt that up, and then I can put my new Rancho shock in and go from there. So here's a close-up of the TTX. So see the welds, I mean, they look pretty good. Ball joint is very tight. And coating looks really good. There's a little bit like a scuff here in coating. It's probably from shipping. It's marked for left as well. I think it's a pretty good quality item. The Fords, original at 226,000 miles, looks okay. I will say that up here, when I put in that ball joint, the metal actually separated and it's actually held together by the ball joint. It's 2 pieces of stamped steel that come together. Or maybe it's just rusting off. I don't quite remember, but yeah, so I think that one held up pretty well, and we'll see how this one does. So here's the Rancho next to the Bilstein, and honestly, I'm super excited for this because it gives you a dial so you can adjust tension, I think. And on top of that, there's a rubber bump stop at the top, so you're gonna get much better dampening. And honestly, it's just nice that it bolts in. They gave me all new bolts too, so I don't have to reuse the old ones. Super excited. Okay, so now we got the Rancho coil in, or control arm in bolted. Got some bolts started up here, nothing's really tightened down. I'm gonna hold the hub up and make sure that I loop in the bottom ball joint at the same time as the upper. And then I'm gonna have this nut ready just to hold it in place, and then I can go and snug these ball joints down, and then I can begin the rest of the reason. And so here's the Mevotech hub. Honestly, it's pretty good quality. It has all the right clips, plugs and everything already built in, so that's nice. And yeah, so I should bolt right up. I got everything kind of torqued down, not fully, and then I got greased both ball joints. So once I put this on, then I can put in new pads, put on the new rotor, and put it all back together. Okay, so new hub's installed. It's torqued to 175 foot-pounds. I just did the best I could. Rerouted the line. I haven't put in the brackets yet because the caliper's still hanging. Routed the line all the way up, reconnected it. I put a little bit of copper here, just hopefully stops the rotor from sticking. And then yeah, so then here's the new power stop rotor. Put that on, and then I will clean up the brakes and reassemble all that, and then I should be able to put the tire back on. Okay, so I got it all back together. New rotors, pads are in. Everything else is semi-tight. I'm gonna put the tire on, new lug nuts, drop it, tighten the rest of the bushings, and then I'm gonna start on the other side, which I'm not gonna record because it'll be the exact same thing. But yeah, thank you for watching.